Okay, I think you guys need to understand what TERFs and radfems like actually believe. And so you understand when people are saying that you are engaging in TERF rhetoric, you need to understand why people are telling you this, because a lot of people keep saying that's not TERF rhetoric. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Now, what are my credentials? Okay, I was abused by a ton of cishet men. And so I had a lot of trauma with it, which is part of the reason I didn't realize I was a trans guy. And also it led me down the radfem pipeline that, of course, I am no longer in. I was not a TERF, I was a radfem. But there is an overlap. Like, there is a huge overlap between TERFs and radfems, unfortunately. Now, not every radfem is a TERF, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Point is, let's get into what they actually believe and how they talk about trans people, because you guys are saying a lot of wrong shit, and I just cannot listen to it. Let me dispel the biggest myth about TERFs and radfems right now. A lot of people are saying that TERFs only talk about trans women. Nope, they don't. They talk about trans men a lot. Obviously, they seem to focus more on trans women because, and we'll get there, but they do focus on trans men as well. In fact, they actually have terminology for both trans men and trans women. Their terminology is TIF and TIM. A TIM is a trans-identified male. That's what they would call a trans woman. Is that not disgusting? It is. And then obviously the other is a TIF, trans-identified female. That is what they would call a trans man. Do you see how they're inherently misgendering both trans women and trans men? Yeah. Now here's the thing you need to understand. TERFs hate trans women because they see all trans women as men. So they see trans women as identifying as women to get into women's spaces and hurt women. Do you see now why when people tell you that you are regurgitating TERF rhetoric, they're telling you that? Because whether or not if you mean it in a TERF way, quite frankly, I don't think you can say this sentiment and not mean it in a TERF way, because it's going to come back to that. It doesn't matter. It is indistinguishable between what they're saying. TERFs 100% would be on your side right now if you told them, well, we are actually restricting the definition of what a lesbian is. They would be applauding you right now. And I'm sure from their little cave depths, they are. Because the whole thing about being a TERF is trying to make being a woman, being a lesbian, anything associated with feminine, very exclusive to cis women. Okay? They don't want trans men there, and they don't want trans women there. Like, they don't want that. They don't want trans people in general. I don't know how many times we have to explain this to you. Let's talk about how they specifically view trans men, though, because a lot of y'all are missing this. The way that they view trans men, and I've had people tell me no, and I'm like, I've seen it. I was in these circles. Like, I've seen what these people say. Their hostility towards trans women and trans men, they have hostility for both groups. It's a different kind of hostility, right? So like I said, with trans women, these are male invaders infiltrating our female spaces. With trans men, however, this is their argument. They say, trans men are just like, it's very much giving poor, confused little girl vibes. Like, you know that book, Irreversible Damage? If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. That's what we're talking about when TERFs talk about trans men. It's this rhetoric that women, little girls, women, teen girls are being groomed into gender ideology. This is literally how they talk. I am not exaggerating. This is how they talk about trans men and trans people in general. Yes. So women are being taken advantage of and groomed into this, okay? That's how they talk about it. And another point they like to make is that trans men are, like, trans men who decide to medically transition. I don't think they even have the concept of a non-passing trans man. I don't know what the hell they think about that, but when it comes to, like, trans men who medically transition and are stealth, they will say that, though, they're very mad about those men, and they say that, like, they transition to escape, like, misogyny and gain male privilege. Like, this is literally what they say. Like, it's actually insane. So they hate trans men and they hate trans women. And with trans men specifically, they're seen as gender traitors. They will say those exact words about trans men. Yes, they are called gender traitors. And here's the thing about being a radfem and like a TERF and all this stuff is when I was in like that like type of space, a lot of us were dysphoric. I used to identify as non-binary, but I didn't talk about it because in these spaces, that's not a thing, right? So I suppressed it and it led to like a very, very damaging, era for me. A lot of them actually are trans people as well that are dysphoric, but they call themselves dysphoric women. Like, you're not allowed to acknowledge being trans. Like, it's like not a thing. You literally have to call yourself like a dysphoric woman if you're like AFAB, and it's whack. It's genuinely whack, and like the copium goes crazy. Because they don't think trans is a real thing. They don't think it is. So yes, when your arguments that you're making about this whole lesbian discourse are, well, trans men can't identify as lesbians because lesbian means this. Men stay out. And here's another thing. It all ties back to hating men, okay? Listen, we all know that a ton of cishet men fucking suck. I don't think anyone is debating that. But when you treat men as inherently evil, do you know what that's called? That's called bioessentialism, and that is what TERFs and radfems do as well. And that shit got me because I was traumatized and abused by men. So, like, it's very easy to fall into those things if you're vulnerable, and that's why I'm trying to spread information on this shit so you're aware. So here's your reminder. Men are not inherently evil. Women are not inherently good. I also don't like that argument in general because you are removing the choice that a lot of shitty cishet men make to consciously be bad. You are removing autonomy and saying that they just can't help it because they're men. Like, that's just how they are. And again, it ties back to these arguments of, well, every single man is privileged. There is a lack of intersectionality in radfem circles and in these conversations that we're having. Do you see the parallels with that as well? And again, talking about how men are evil, get out the nasty men. You sound like radfems, and you also sound like radfems because the way that you're talking about these like trans men is the same way they talk also about trans women. You do know that, right? Like, it's not good just because you think you're being gender affirming. That's like not good. TERFs also like to do really insidious things, like if they see historical examples of trans people, they will try to like change it. There was a huge lie going around for a while that like Marsha P. Johnson wasn't actually a trans woman. Like, yes, her identity, she could have identified in other ways as well, but like they will try to rewrite history and say that like all this stuff. Same thing with like there's historical examples of trans men. They will say that those are just women and they had to live that way to like be taken seriously. That is what y'all have been saying in this conversation as well. I just thought about that. Yes, I've seen people literally in this conversation say, like, people have pointed out historical examples of like lesbians and like trans men lesbians, and they're like, well, that's just because they had to be, and like society was transphobic. Society is transphobic now. There's never been a point in time where society is not transphobic. Is it that crazy to you that like trans people exist? It's not just they've never been allowed and we're allowed to now. Like, where do you live that like trans people are just like, oh, perfectly accepted? Like, so yes, I have not heard one point in this conversation that is not like almost a direct parallel to TERF radfem rhetoric. Not one. Literally not one. And this is just me focusing on like the TERF radfem aspect. Obviously there's like, yeah, you're invalidating other people and you really should not be doing that. Like, that's so weird. But yes, you're talking like a TERF. And I'm telling you right now, I have seen people also openly say like, well, guess I'm a TERF then. That is not a thing you want to be saying. What? I mean, great. At least you're open so we know to avoid you about it. But like, TERFs are horrible people, guys. Like, they're terrible. It's not a thing you want to be. You should never want to be on the side that's like literally calling trans women men and trans men women. Like, what? Also, last thing I'm gonna throw in there, I don't understand why you guys cannot understand the concept that somebody could have like a sapphic attraction while not being a woman. I actually don't. I feel like these are the same people that tell me that because I'm a trans man, I've not experienced misogyny or other trans men, and I'm like, what world do we live in? There's like so many issues of like bigotries going on. Like, there's transphobia, there's obviously racism, because my god, some of the things I have seen like white people say to people of color on this app about like, I'm not learning queer history. It's like, so I can just say I'm black now? What the hell are you guys doing? You guys, what the fuck are you doing? Like, there's just so many levels of bigotry that are occurring in this conversation. And you know how this all could have been avoided? If you guys saw a trans person whose identity you didn't understand and we're like, yeah, okay, and moved on. But anyways, yes, now that you were educated on this, be sure to call out the TERF rhetoric that you see in radfem rhetoric you see on this app, because it's rampant right now. I am not kidding. Like, we're getting real close. Like, I swear to God, y'all are gonna start on trans women next if you haven't already. I don't like where this is headed. Anyone using a bioessentialist argument and like these strict definitions, y'all, it's a very slippery slope. That's what I'm gonna say on that. Let me make one more point. If you think somebody's self-identification is invalidating, I don't know what to tell you. It's a self-identification. A self-identification cannot be invalidating because you're choosing it. There's autonomy. When somebody else is misgendering you, that's invalidation because you are incorrectly labeling someone when they said they're something else. That is why if you call me a lesbian as a trans man and that's also bisexual, I would be like, yeah, you're weird. But if a trans guy lesbian says I'm a lesbian, that would be fine. That is literally the difference. Thank you. Good.